The moral, the moral life. Introduction on the nature of morality. Morality is about good and evil and right and wrong action. What exactly are these? It's not always easy to say. Various religions and philosophies differ. What is the good? Religious people identify it with God, the source of all being and value. Plato thought that the good was a transcendent, indefinable mystery, the source of all being and value. It is the absolute truth, higher even than God and discoverable by reason and intuition. Plato's follower, the Cambridge philosopher G. E. Moore, modified Plato's formula, omitting the transcendental dimension. The good he thought was a non-natural, indefinable property like the color yellow. It was not the source of all reality, only of morality and aesthetic reality. On the other hand, Jeremy Bentham, chapter 4, and Richard Taylor, chapter 2, deny that there is anything mysterious or transcendent about goodness. They hold that the good is a definable natural property. It refers to pleasure or the object of desire. Good is a functional term. It refers to the satisfaction of our desires, the pleasure we feel when satisfied. Variations on this basic hedonism appear in the literature. The human good for Mill consists not just in any kind of pleasure, but in certain qualities of pleasure, a deep sense of well-being or happiness spread over a lifetime, not necessarily a life of ecstatic rapture, quote, but moments of such, in an existence made up of few and transitory pains, many and various pleasures, with a decided predominance of the active over the passive, and having as the foundation of the whole not to expect more from life than it is capable of bestowing. End quote. For Nietzsche, chapter 2, goodness has nothing to do with pleasure or happiness. Quote, only the Englishman wants that, end quote. But power, the sense of dominating, of being in control, of being the alpha male in the pack. Goodness derives from the will to power that we all deeply crave. As such, it is hierarchical and inegalitarian. But the envious, mediocre masses detest this natural good, and so are determined to crush it. Morality, according to Nietzsche, is the herd's attempt to institutionalize mediocrity and protect the sheep from the more excellent wolves. The priests, both religious and secular moralizers, invent the soft moral virtues: pity, patience, peace, kindness, forgiveness, and tolerance, in order to protect themselves from their betters, helping the worst off, redeeming the worthless, forgiving the criminal, and maintaining the lives of sick bodies and diseased souls, the criminals, the stupid, and the mediocre. The ideas of good and evil must be understood in the clash between the superior overmen and the priests who represent the masses. Right and wrong action then become a kind of politically correct ideology, which ironically proves the Nietzschean point of the will to power. For the moralists invent good and evil in order to empower themselves and their clientele against their superior enemy. Where does the truth lie in these matters? One thing everyone engaged in the debate recognizes: morality is both personal and social. It is personal in that it has to do with how we should live our lives, what we should do, or which we should strive to become. It is social in that it recognizes that we are not hermits or gods, independent beings with no need for each other. We are centers of conscious striving, desire, who have wills of our own but have to adjust the pursuit of our goals in the light of other people's desires and interests. How to reconcile and adjust these twin forces, the personal and the social, is the central domain of ethics. It is the central concern of this anthology. Many works of ethics emphasize the broader areas of social policy or social ethics, just war theory, economic relations, punishment, political arrangements, and institutional justice. There is a place for that. But what I want us to focus on in this work is the more personal dimension of ethics, its raison d'etre, its fundamental purposes. We want to build from the ground up, for unless we get our foundations firmly laid, our structure will be in danger of capsizing. We will first study the nature of morality, beginning with a sizable selection from William Golding's moral allegory, Lord of the Flies. After a commentary, we will examine the philosophical analog to Golding's work, Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, written 300 years earlier. In chapter 2, we examine the nature of good and evil. After this, we raise one of the most crucial questions about morality. Is it universally valid or only relative to individual choices or one's culture? In part 2, we progress to the 3 classical moral theories. Utilitarianism, which aims at maximizing good consequences, usually defined in terms of pleasure or happiness. Deontological ethics, which focuses on the individual act, its inherent rightness or wrongness, and the individual, his or her inherent dignity or value. And virtue ethics, which focuses on character, the kind of qualities we should inculcate, the kind of people we should become. But all of these theories recognize the role of virtue and vice, morally significant character traits. So in chapter 7, we examine several classic virtues and vices. In part 3, we consider theoretical issues that are implicit in our study of the nature of morality and moral theories, enlarging on what was said earlier. If the first 2 parts constituted the foundations and formal structure of moral theory, part 3 deals with the materials in our building. First, we examine the idea of the self in relation to others. Sometimes we can flout moral rules when it is in our perceived interest to do so. Should we do so? Why should we be moral whenever we can enhance personal gain by disregarding morality's requirements? This problem is related to the second. What really is important about life? What, if anything, gives it meaning? Or is it merely, quote, a tale told by an idiot full of sound and fury, signifying nothing, end quote. Here we look at various worldviews about the nature and destiny of humanity: Epicureanism, Stoicism, Theism, Buddhism, Existentialism, and others. In chapter 10, we examine the importance of freedom and autonomy. Finally, in part 4, we examine 6 practical moral issues. Perhaps continuing our metaphor of the house, these constitute the inner dynamics, the plumbing, electricity, and furniture. In chapter 11, we examine the meaning of human sexuality in relation to love and marriage. What does morality permit and forbid? In chapter 12, we analyzed the difficult problem of abortion. What rights, if any, do fetuses have? In chapter 13, we look at euthanasia. Chapter 14 deals with our duties to animals, including whether we should be vegetarians. Chapter 15 considers our duties to the environment. How should we relate to nature and the general environment? Do we have obligations to future generations to leave this world a safe place in which to live? Finally, chapter 16 deals with the pressing issue of global terrorism in relation to the quest for justice. I have generally included readings that take opposing stands on the issues at hand, though sometimes I have simply included a reading to stimulate thinking. The main purpose of this work is to help you think through some of the most difficult and exciting issues of our time, hence the use of literature to supplement philosophical analysis. Literature particularizes the general problem and brings it home to us, enlivening the imagination so that we see and feel nuances that are vital to resolving difficult moral issues, possibilities that we might not have considered in our abstract thinking about moral dilemmas. But it is no substitute for philosophical analysis. So while many chapters begin with a literary work, the philosophical essays are where most of the necessary argument and theory take place.